My name is Christine Hong. I am the director of the Center for Racial Justice, and I am so pleased to welcome you to today's event. It's one of the culminating events, there are a couple more, of the CRJ for this academic year. And I'd really like to welcome Amihan to this space. This event is called Filipinx Diasporic Music as Resistance and Revolution. And I want to say a couple of things. One is that the course in which this series is affiliated, the course is called Pilipinx Historical Dialogue. This is the Pilipinx Historical Dialogue series of the Center for Racial Justice. This is the longest running, continuously offered ethnic studies course on the UC Santa Cruz campus. And I say this all the time, the reason why, so this is an event that has been organized by both CRJ and by Amihan. The reason is that Filipino students on this campus have been holding things down. They have held down this course. And what does this course do? From the outset, this course did something. Not only did it plug a gap insofar as there wasn't critical Filipino studies courses regularly offered within the larger campus-wide curriculum, but also it went further. This course has centered political education. And political education is essential to all movements for decolonization, de-imperialization, for racial justice. And it seldom is centered within university spaces. But because of the work of the PhD co-coordinators going back now 20 years, there has been critical Filipino studies and political education within the context of PhD. And it is in that spirit that we reached out to Amihan, whose work is deeply critical, deeply anti-imperialist, and centers a kind of critical political educational sort of lens within the realm of creative work. But I would like to hand things over to Matt, who will do a further introduction. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. Hey, everybody, my name is Matthew Lim. I'm one of the coordinators of Filipinx Historical Dialogue, also known as CREST 45, hosted under the Critical Race and Ethnic Studies Department here at UC Santa Cruz. Today, I have the pleasure of presenting to you all Amihan. So Amihan is a poet, musician, and community organizer born and raised in San Francisco, repping the Excelsior. Amihan was named after the women's peasant organization based in the countryside of her homeland. While in college, she was a founding member of the Davis chapter of Anak Bayan USA, an anti-imperialistic youth and student organization fighting for national liberation in the Philippines. Currently, she works with high schoolers through the Kabataan Youth Leadership Program based in the Filipino Community Center, while also working on her debut album, written and produced by herself in its entirety, set to be released later this year. Now, I'll pass it off to Amihan. Everyone, please give her a warm welcome.
Hi, y'all. Good morning. Thanks y'all for having me in this space. I'm gonna be real. I am very anxious. One, I'm not usually up this early. I know it's not even that early, but I'm not usually up this early. But also I'm only used to really like being asked to perform and not necessarily to speak for things, but I really appreciate the folks, holding down this class that reached out to me because, I think it's important to talk about culture work. I actually don't think it's talked about enough. And so first off, I know it's early, y'all, but I'm gonna ask like if y'all are comfortable, like what's it called? Turn your camera on so it doesn't feel like I'm just like talking to but besides that, yeah, again, my name is Amihan. I use she and they pronouns. And I'm gonna actually start it off with a little song for y'all. Yeah, I'm gonna start off with a little song for y'all. I know it's early, but if you want to vibe along, um, I just want to give y'all a little intro about myself. And I tested out the sound and everything, but please let me know in the chat if it sounds weird or whatever. And then also feel free to, throughout the event, engage throughout the chat and stuff. Cool. Can y'all hear it? Cool. Yeah. My father's ancestors up in the province of Ilocos, my Lola's from Weber. I see her called that home at just two said see her. Had to move across the globe, great Lolo just caught stationed in San Francisco. Now he's in the Navy and sailing the West Coast, serving for a country that don't serve his people. U.S. military with schemes that are lethal just to pump some diesel, but that's just the prequel. Once in high school, my Lola moved to Delano with a migrant uncle trying to make dollars from pesos, but constantly the struggling because the pay's low. So we joined the strikes with Latinos and Filipinos. Lola graduated, then moved back to the Bay, and her and my Lolo, they raised the generations. Then that house that we all grew up in was taken because of gentrification. They couldn't make the payments. They created 6 kids, 13 grandchildren, then were faced with displacement from the mission. I mean, my parents and siblings, only ones left in the city my whole family grew up in. So listen to me, this is an oral history. These are the stories that you'll never read on textbook sheets. These narratives immigrated back from the Philippines. So vibe with the speech, vibe with the beat. So listen to me, this is an oral history. These are the stories that you'll never read on textbook sheets. These narratives immigrated back from the Philippines. So vibe with the speech, vibe with the beat, vibe with the speech. Said vibe with the beat. Said vibe with the vibe with the history. Vibe with the history. Yeah. Say 1973, take us back to the Philippines. Mama was born in Luzon and Quezon City. Similarly, she's a city kid like me, and we both hold it down as the oldest of our siblings. Yeah, Lola was a teacher for a living, but then they had to leave the only home they lived in. Lolo don't wanna go, but he left unwilling, cause they had to escape Marco Senna's killings. That's just the beginning. So when my mom was only 8, she flew 7,000 miles and landed in LA. Yeah, reunited with the family in the States, both space for the new culture to embrace. Yeah, with the brown face, she wasn't in the majority in a foreign place. As a model minority, her struggles erased in the spaces of the pages of this nation. So instead she shared his situation orally. See, these stories are more than me. Yeah, they're more than me. Yeah. Say, listen to me, this is an oral history. These are the stories that you'll never read on textbook sheets. These narratives immigrated back from the Philippines. So vibe with the speech, vibe with the beat. So listen to me, this is an oral history. These are the stories that you'll never read on textbook sheets. These narratives immigrated back from the Philippines. So vibe with the speech, vibe with the beat, vibe with the speech. Say vibe with the beat. Say vibe with the vibe with the history of vibe with the history of vibe with the speech, vibe with the beat, vibe with the speech, vibe with the beat, vibe with the history, vibe with the history from the motherland to the belly of the beast, from the Philippines to the SFC, to the SFC, from the motherland to the belly of the beast, from the Philippines to the SFC, to the SFC. Hey, thanks y'all. I know it's early, but thanks y'all. That song is called Roots. Can I is someone able to share my slides actually? Cool. So you can go to the next slide. Yeah. So that one second. Let me see. So yeah, so that was the first track off my project, and I wanted to share with y'all today to really give background about myself. That's also the first track because I really want to root the project in my family's migration story. And so, yeah, again, I was born and raised in San Francisco. I graduated from Davis um, in the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. And so since then, I've just been working on music. So I just want to first like preface this with like a little background um, of me as an artist. So I've been making music and writing poetry my entire life. I've always loved to sing. I started playing piano in elementary school. I kind of just like learned songs I liked by ear, and then I taught myself to play guitar, ukulele in middle school, and then also started writing spoken word pieces around that time. And so, um, um, also some important background that has really shaped my music is that I grew up with parents that were community organizers. So in these slides, you can see some pictures of them. So my mom was a founding member of the League of Filipino Students at SF State. And so the League of Filipino Students or SF or LFS, it was the first overseas chapter of LFS in the US. And so that was founded in 1997, which was the year before I was born. And around this time, my mom was also a union organizer. She was straight out of college. And my dad was also very active in LFS as well. And he was a musician, a cultural worker. He played the bass, drums, guitar, and he was in a band called Descarte Namin, which you can see like pictures of them too. And so I wanted to like read y'all their like little Bandcamp bio. So in 1999, Descarte Namin arose from the underground of San Francisco's political organizing and music scenes. One of the only US based Filipino music and movement bands of this generation, Descarte has rock shows at rallies and community music venues while also actively organizing in Bay Area communities for immigrant rights and against the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and at home. San Francisco born but bred on resistance music from all over the world, Descarte mixes rock guitar with Latin and hip hop beats, reggae and funk bass lines, folk blues and soul vocals, and indigenous influences from the Philippines. The result is a unique Descarte sound that defies traditional music categories. As a band of cultural guerrillas, community activists, and musicians, Descarte uses music as a weapon to mobilize, to inspire, and to celebrate that even after 500 years of colonization, Filipinos are still here. And so I was actually asking my dad a couple weeks ago, like what their process was like in creating their music. And he said they would take different political education workshops and then write the lyrics or songs based on what they learned. And also most of the band members were also members of SF Chirp, or the San Francisco Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines. And so that's how they use their cultural work to also organize and mobilize folks. And so, for me growing up, going to these shows or even watching them practice and record, like straight up my room used to be like the music room they practiced in, and then like the studio right here is where like my dad would like record and like mix their second project. So that really influenced my own understanding of being an artist and what it means, not just to replicate the type of music that we always hear today in capitalist society, but to challenge that and to actually create culture, create a new culture. And so, of course, my parents' organizing work really emphasized the importance of connecting local struggles, for example, for housing or relevant education, to the liberation movement in the Philippines, fighting for the same things on a larger scale. And so, I feel like my parents' work also really emphasized the importance of not just organizing or creating cultural work, of course, to contribute to these struggles. Oh, sorry, I had to burp. But also how it's essential to integrate with communities that you are serving and making music about. And so I wanted to talk about one of Descartes' songs, the River Song, that I like mentioned to the class to listen to if y'all weren't able to. Oh, can you go to the next slide actually? So I put the description of the song and some of the lyrics on this slide, the chorus. And so um, the song was written after two of the vocalists, the singers of Descartes, went on an exposure trip to the Cordilleras in the Philippines, and it talks about one particular struggle they witnessed of indigenous communities defending their land and protesting the damming of the Chico River. And so it was written in 2002, and so this year actually marks the 20 years that it's been around. And so it's a song that, you know, I grew up hearing at different shows and actions, and I really think is a really big, like, it's such an important part of the history of cultural work here in the US and especially in the Bay. There have been like a bunch of different renditions done of it. I've even seen a video of indigenous Lumad kids in Mindanao like singing it in the Philippines when some of my homies went back. And so, you know, this is just an example of how powerful cultural work can be, how powerful music can be in transcending both like language barriers and geographical borders. Um, and so while I was kind of like prepping for what I was going to say for this event, I realized how my own process, like writing and performing and getting into cultural work, was kind of like similar, parallel to that of my dad's and his band. So back in high school, I was in the Kabataan youth program that I volunteer for now at the Filipino Community Center, which is literally just like a couple blocks from like where I'm at right now, where I grew up. And my both of my parents were actually co-founders of the Filipino Community Center. And so that in high school, that's where I really got to experience like creating collectively with youth, with just creating collectively for the first time, but you know, with other youth my age. And so the first time I ever like performed anything in front of people, it was my senior year in high school. And I'm not sure if folks are familiar with this Save Our Schools campaign. Um, for those who aren't, I'm gonna be talking about it throughout this event actually. But back in 2015, we learned about the bombings and the raids of indigenous Lumad schools in Mindanao by the Philippine military. And in this specific time, we learned about one raid where teachers were killed right in front of their students in the schools. And so these attacks happen and have only continued to happen throughout the years because, you know, an education that is relevant, that teaches their own indigenous languages and practices of farming and sustaining the land, and the importance of also defending their ancestral lands because it's so abundant, um, is such a big threat to the Philippine government. And so again, this is back when I was in high school. I wrote a song talking like after learning about this, um, I wrote a song talking about this violence being faced by the Lumad. And my homie Kayla, who is actually, she's a chairperson at LFS now, so now she organizes too. She wrote a little rap to it, and we performed it at our high school's human rights assembly. And so after that, we went on to perform the song at different events and different shows. And so this is how I really first got into cultural work. Like I said, I always made my own music, but I think there is also a difference between like making music and doing cultural work. And so it was also really cool to have like youth mentors that were also cultural workers. Two of my youth coordinators are in a band called Mass Bass, and y'all should definitely check them out. Yeah, they're sick. You should definitely check them out. The guitarist of Mass Bass is actually the guitarist of Discarded Nom in my dad's band. So you can see just the connections of cultural work throughout the years. And so, yeah, my youth coordinators, they really inspired us and encouraged us to perform or to transform these lessons that we're learning in the program. It's just a high school youth program, but to transform it into art, into music, and to share with our community. And so you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so I'm gonna do another song for y'all. So this next song is, I call it the expo song right now. It's a working title, so if maybe when I'm singing it, if y'all have any better ideas for a title, y'all can drop it in the chat or something. But I went to the Philippines for the very first time in September of 2019, and so I just turned 21, and I integrated with farmers and indigenous Aita communities in Central Luzon. And yeah, I'll talk more about my trip, but maybe I'll just do I'll do the song for y'all right now. Cool. So this is the expo song. Take me to the land in which my brown pigment is rooted in, where the sun strikes the backs of my people, and let me feel the earth beneath my feet, the breeze that's deep inside to me. Let me go journey home, sow and see my seeds grow. Yeah, never been back to my homeland. Never felt its rivers through my veins. All my people's worries through the rains. Never felt ties to the countryside, though its movement spoken through my name. Though this were my Lola watered roots that won't decay. I haven't seen the struggle in those hills, but I can feel its power still, as they fought for their right to thrive, to rise, to learn, till I travel to the lands in which my brown pigment is rooted in. Felt the sun strike the skin of my ego, and I knelt and felt the earth beneath my feet, the breeze that's deep inside to me. Traveled to my home from the skull, sowed and saw my seeds grow. Let me tell you about it. Look, first we went to Tatay's rice fields, saw cranes destroying soil, what a pity. And the military instilling fear, the displacement first phases of New Clark City. Then traveled through the mountains and found it's a hub with abundant communities. They offered shelter when they barely had means for their own families. We basked in a river that's about to be dammed, watch rain fall on the Aita's ancestral land. See the deeds in the palms of their hands, the palms of their hands. See, I stood upon the lands in which the indigenous are rooted in, trying to strive for a life that is peaceful. Saw their connection to the earth through their bare feet, their livelihoods in the native trees in the Philippines. Free the seeds of my people. Free the seeds of my people. Free them seeds of my people. Seeds of my frequencies for my people. Frequencies for the people. Seeds for the shed my leaves. I got trees for family, trees are my peoples, trees are my frequencies for the people. See, I breathe for my people, felt the waters through my veins, regulate my heart rate. Meditate, release anxiety and pain. We got caught up in a typhoon the last day of our stay. As we escape, left communities in pain. Ain't no immunity when natural disasters come your way. Intensified by climate change, whole livelihoods drained. I've never known this type of struggle, so how the fuck can I relate? Recalibrate, balance my spiritual state. As I sat up in the hilltops, about to precipitate. Tears in my eyes hit the earth at the same time as the raindrops hit soil nourished crops. In the distance, gate shifts. In an instant, see capitalism's imprint. In the indent of the bedrock, we don't exist. Nah, independent from the systems, we're connected. Dialectics, intersections of sectors and dimensions. And the way that lens is sacred, excavated. The destruction only strengthens. Fights for liberation, not aggression, we're defending. Homes of our ancestors, pass it down to our descendants. Said we exist in the past and the present. Yeah, so that was the Expo song. Um, Thanks, y'all. I see y'all in the chat. I'm sorry. I'm telling you, I'm still hella nervous, but I see y'all in the chat, so I appreciate y'all. So can I get the slides up again, please? Thank you. So so I wrote that first half of the song, or the first verse of the song, actually even before I knew I was gonna go to the Philippines for the first time, which, you know, really just speaks to my longing to go and visit, you know, where my mom grew up, where my family's from. And I wrote the other verses after coming back and really reflecting on my experiences. Um, so I actually went on that exposure trip with my mom and some filmmakers who were also members of SF CHIRP, again, the Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines. And so we went on a documentation trip to film and interview community members and to, you know, document their culture, their homes, their everyday lives, but also their intensifying conditions and the threat of displacement that they were facing and continue to face due to the construction of New Clark City. So New Clark City was set to displace over 1 million people, including um, workers, families, farmers, indigenous communities. And it was set to be around twice the size of Manila. And so by the time that we were there, construction had already started. And I'm gonna be honest, I really don't know even what the state of the development is now, but I can only imagine how even more violent the displacement has been throughout these past couple of years. And so again, there's some pictures here from my trip. I integrated with Aita communities. And for those of y'all who don't know, the Aita are known as the first inhabitants of the Philippines. So they've been living there on their ancestral lands for generations and generations. They are hunter-gatherers, but also have farm and have livestock that they sustain themselves with. And so we stayed with a couple of different communities over the span of a week, which is actually like way shorter than usual exposure trips are. Usually they're around like a month of integrating with different communities. And for some of these little sitchos or communities, we're like the first, for some of them, we're the first outsiders to visit. And so as I talk about in the song, um, the my trip back was very agitating. This is the first time I'm going back to going to the Philippines at all. And I remember one of the most like memorable moments that I do reference in the song is we went on like a 3-hour hike up the mountain, the most beautiful scenery I've ever seen, ever. And once we got to the top, or once we got to like our destination, You can see it actually in this picture on the top right. Um, like literally you can see like these mountains like being sliced, and so like being sliced around people's homes. And so it was like, this is only one case, like all throughout where we were walking around, like you'll see that they were starting to pave the mountain in order to build a highway for tourists. To They wanted like this area to be such a huge tourist destination. And so they were starting to build a highway for tourists to be able to drive through the mountains, and they can end up in the beach. Like that's literally why they like paved these mountains. And so if y'all can see like in the picture, like yeah, like where we're standing right there, that's like, I don't even know, right, if it's if they already like cemented it at this point, but yeah, like that's where they were beginning to build the freeway. And so I remember just like after going on this like beautiful hike and then coming to the top, meeting the families that live even higher up in the mountains, and just being in tears about like how all of this like beauty and abundance that's been sustaining these peoples for years and years and years was being destroyed. And so you can go to the next slide. So yeah, so that I put some of the lyrics up here from the song. So the one on the left is kind of me reflecting during that moment. And oh yeah, and then this is a picture from when we were like in the top, like during our hike. That shit was tiring, but it was really beautiful. And so on the right side, I have my lyrics that talk about how we actually got stuck in a typhoon the last day, the day that we were supposed to leave. And so this particular community that we were in at this point in our trip was actually right next to a military base where both the Philippine and the US military would do like exercise, like military exercises together, which would be very like violent to the communities. Sometimes they would close off. So like, yeah, they would close off the checkpoint so folks couldn't exit or enter for like up to weeks. And at one point they were sharing how actually there's like a little like 12-year-old boy who ran up like approached one of the grenades after the military exercises were done and they were free to like go around. He approached one of the grenades and it hadn't set off yet, so it set off and it killed him. And so like this is just one example of how like militarization really does affect communities in the Philippines, and especially indigenous communities. And so during the typhoon, the only secure structure that folks could evacuate to was the church there, because again, like at these military checkpoints to get even enter and exit, they wouldn't let the Aita bring in materials to like maintain and like fix up their homes, like their actual houses, because they were already planning to displace them. So in their heads, it was like they don't need to maintain their homes. We already want these communities out of here, basically. And so during the typhoon, you know, I remember seeing families crying because they lost their homes, their crops got flooded. And once, you know, the rain cleared up, you know, like the folks that I was on the trip with, we had the privilege, we just hopped on a bus and we were able to leave, you know, while these folks were literally stuck here trying to figure out how to recuperate from this typhoon, which, you know, we know is like, typhoons are very common, and both very common in both, and also very devastating in the Philippines. And so even though I was raised in the movement, always learning about like these injustices, it really was this expo trip that really pushed me to contribute, not just through the cultural work, but also through the organizing work. So in the months coming back from my exposure trip, it really just aligned also that that's when I started like my journey as like an artist, like sharing my own music. I started booking a lot of shows, and so I was able to prop the struggles of the Aita and other indigenous communities in the Philippines. Um, but like I said, I really did want to take action in more direct ways, but there were no mass organizations at Davis at the time. Um, so we built one. So can you go to the next slide, please? Yes, cool. So yeah, I was a part of Anak Bayan Davis. Um, I'm not sure if folks are familiar with Anak Bayan with AB. But yeah, it's an anti-imperialist youth and students org. There's chapters all over the US and all over the world, all over the Philippines. And so we started as a chapter organizing committee my last year in college. And it was honestly hard too because this was also during the pandemic. And so it was like learning to organize folks virtually, which is very difficult. And even after I graduated, I still tried continue to organize with AB Davis, but it was hard since I wasn't based in the area. And so but our framework of Anagbayan, is that, we aren't like Filipinos here in America, like standing in solidarity with Filipinos in the Philippines. Like, no, we're contributing to the same movement. And, we understand that the work that we do here directly supports folks doing the same work back home. And so, for example, I'm going to talk about the Save Our Schools campaign again. So Anakbayan USA is one of the ones leading the SOS or Save Our Schools campaign here in the US. And so this campaign is again to support Lumad communities in Mindanao and their fight to defend their ancestral lands against military violence and against multinational corporations that want to exploit their lands for raw materials such as gold, copper, lumber. Um, and, I think, not only just as Filipinos, but as people here in the US, we really do have a duty to call out the Philippine and our own government, because it's our tax dollars that are also funding these attacks and killings of the Lumad. And so um, these pictures are from different actions and shows that we mobilize folks to and that I was performing at. So the top left picture and the middle picture is from PSONA, the People's State of the Nation address in 2020. I think that was the first one during the pandemic. And so this happens every year in the US, in the Philippines, and in other countries to counter the Philippine president's State of the Nation address, where they talk about all the, I don't know, good shit they're doing. But, it really is to expose um, the brutality and the violence that the Philippines government like continues to put on its own people. And so um, yeah, and then so there's also pictures of some other shows of me performing like with some other homies, like on the bottom left in the top right corner. um that's me performing with some homies who used to organize with different LFS and also Anakbayan chapters. So you can go to the next slide, please. Cool. So um the track that follows the expo song that I just did for y'all is called Dear Kasama. So that's the next piece I'm gonna share with y'all. And it was also written after I came back from my expo trip. But before I was with AB Davis. So I was not organizing yet. And so this was like a continuation of me reflecting about you can imagine me like literally I came back like the same week I had to start school again. So it was a big readjustment like period. And so I was really reflecting about the parallels of displacement and violence that youth and students face both in the Bay and um, in the Philippines, and of course how conditions are much more heightened over there back home. So, for example, like in the Aita communities, some kids or a lot of them walk like a couple hours every day to get to the nearest school. And so when there are like typhoons or heavy rains and the rivers get flooded, they aren't even able to cross them to get to school. So when we talk about like access to education, It's not just how we talk about it here, even in like physical access to schools, you know, like they can't just hop on like Zoom if they can't physically get to their class. And so, yeah, this is actually one of my favorite songs on the project. It's really special to me. And it was, I wrote it in the form of a letter to those that I met while during my trip, who are doing the work to better the conditions of the workers, of the youth, the students, the peasants in the Philippines. So this one is called Dear Kasama. Dear Kasama, how you been? Can I holler at you cause I'm anxious but don't wanna be a bother? I'm writing you this letter cause I bottled up my trauma. Send it overseas to the birthplace of my mama, cause I was raised in the states of my father, where the water ain't much calmer, cause the waves of migration based in commas, and the strains of displacement facing common. How can we prosper on land that's stolen from brown hands, that's sowing the seeds, planting, growing on concrete, where community used to be? Tell me, do you grieve for your home like me? Do you grieve for the earth like me? I've seen a mountain range flat and paved made into a street. I've seen families grow weak, going hungry for weeks, cause we live off green abundance used to flow free. We struggling to breathe, blue in the breeze, and the shoulders dance, carrying stress overseas, in the countryside and under city lights, in the Philippines in the 415, our people trying to survive, yeah. So we just trying to survive, yeah. We just trying to survive, trying to flow with the tides. So we drown and we rise through the lows and the highs. We just trying to survive, so I flow with the tide. But shit, I'm barely alive. Shit, I'm barely Sunsets in the west balances my solar plexus. Though we are oceans away, these rays connect us. Same eight of the blue and red flag that represents us. Distance doesn't mean disconnection. This a reflection. View the world through my perception. Underage, drowning all my rage in a red cup. Burn some sage in search of some protection. Spark a J when I'm trying to reach ascension. Then some said I'm striving for progression. 21 with better ways to deal with my aggressions. 21 revolutions round the sun, but the truth is my work in this one just begun. Cause the sun shine brighter where you from, and the heat from police and like weed in your lungs. Don't gotta be off the drugs to become a victim. This a war on the poor, on the brown, on the young. So this a war on the, this a war on the poor, on the brown, on the young. So we mourn for her. So we mourn for our own as the dawn turns to in the fog of the skull in the Manila sun. Yeah, we mourn for our own as the love turns to so we mourn for her. Yeah, we mourn for our own as the dawn turns to dust. Set in the fog of the skull in the Manila sun. Set this a war on her. So we mourn for our own as the love turns to blood. And though our pain is the same, we can't trace our journey, see what they overlay. We can't bury our story, see that they can create again. As forest after rain descends, said we wane and we change like the moon. Parang buwan, said we bloom and we thrive. Parang mga palayan through monsoon. The one native languages ain't in tune. Our pain ain't the same, but the DNA flowing through our veins, straight from the homeland. So like the moon, we going through phases. As the movement going through waves, we may crash. ocean gon' catch the impact. The ocean gon' catch from each dusk to its dawns. May our people grow strong. Raise fists, raise arms. Draw strength from the stars. From each dusk to its dawn. May our movement grow strong. May you breathe on to the motherland with love, Amihan. Thanks. Sorry, it's so weird. I'm so used to like, some type of noise or something after a thing, but thanks y'all again. I do see y'all in the chat. I also forgot to mention that also what I talk about in that song is the war on drugs in the Philippines that has, been going on and has especially been heightened during the presidency of Duterte. It's killed over 30,000, more than 30,000 folks at this point, and really targets youth, younger folks just like us, especially in urban communities. And yes, so that was called Dear Kasama. I wanted to now talk about the current work that I'm doing. So now, like I said, I graduated. I'm not part of an organization anymore right now. And so now I'm really focusing on being creative in the ways that I can still use my music to contribute to the movement and to prop the work that continues to be done. And, I've come to the understanding that there are different roles that people take up at different times. And, I've decided that right now I really want to dedicate more time to cultural work in a way that I wasn't able to before. Like I said, I've been doing shows. Sorry. I've been doing shows since like 2019, so for about 3 years now, but I still don't have any music out. And it's because I was always busy with school or with organizing. And so, yeah, I really want to be decisive in saying like, I really want to work on my music now because I love it. So you can go to the next slide, please. So I want to talk about some of the ways that I've still been able to use my cultural work to contribute. So the pictures from on the top left and the middle is from I called it my album preview show. I thought the album was going to be done a while ago. So it was my album preview show back in June of last year. So June 2020. It was a fundraiser for the Aita communities that I integrated with during my trip. So I was able to actually fundraise like $3,000 and donate it to those families, those communities. And the show also served as a space for other organizations to outreach and fundraise. So LFS like tabled, sold stickers. SF Chirp sold earrings that were made in the Aita communities. And so I also had all the artists on the lineup were both, so all the artists were the homies over there on the left top corner again. So some of those folks organize, some of those folks are like LFS members, past LFS members, but some of them were also have never been part of an organization and were just make music. And so this allowed our different audiences to come together, and for folks who aren't involved in movement spaces to be able to learn about this type of work being done in relation to the cultural work. And so the pictures on the right side are from PSONA, again, the People State of the Nation from last year, so 2021. And so the call of last year was End the Tyranny in the Philippines, Wakasan na Duterte. And so everyone on the lineup from my show, we came together again to write a song based on this call. And it's also the lyrics of the chorus of that song. And so we performed this and contributed it to that mobilization to Pisona. And on the bottom left is also when we performed it at like Undiscovered. So even like at things that aren't actions or mobilizations, like, you know, cultural work is a way to still prop the the struggles and the movement. And yes, go to Pisona this year, July 18th. um cool. Can you go to the next slide, please? So besides that, um besides just staying up all night working on music, um I also volunteer again at the Filipino Community Center for the Kabataan Youth Program that I was in high school. So like to me, it's just like a full circle thing, which is really sick. And I love building with the youth because I really do see them in myself, but I also like wish I was as passionate and agitated as they are at their age right now. And so, you know, Kabataan, it's just a youth program, but it's a part of Kabataan Alliance, which is a national alliance of different youth and student clubs and orgs all over the US. And so, along with Anak Bayan USA, Kabataan Alliance is also one of the ones leading the Save Our Schools campaign. And so, after being able to like video chat with some Lumad students in the beginning of the school year, our youth felt very invested in the campaign, in the Save Our Schools campaign. So they've been very active in it all throughout the school year. Um, Whether that be leading teach-ins at their school or even mobilizing other high schoolers to different actions and mobilizations. And so the flyer on the left is um, a cultural event that I helped organize and that we had at Hummingbird Farms, which is here in San Francisco, a couple months ago. I believe it was back in March. And so this was a fundraiser for typhoon relief and for the Save Our Schools network. And we also had a bunch of different cultural workers perform. And so you can see in the flyer too, this event highlighted and honored the New Bataan 5. For folks who are not familiar with the New Bataan 5, they were two volunteer teachers for Lumat schools, one community health worker, and two drivers that were tortured and killed by the Philippine military back in the end of February. And so our youth, on the bottom right picture, you can see them. They read um, Chad Book's poem, which was one of the teachers, where he reflects on the quote, "When a Lumad passes away, they aren't buried, they're planted." And so the youth decided to lead a banana and guava tree planting in the farms during the event to honor the new Bataan 5. And they also performed their own rendition of the river song, um, which was so fucking sick. Just I was just like, to see that. Like again, when I talk about like full circle, I'm like, you know, this is the impact that cultural work makes in the movement and even on our young folks. Like it is something that they are able to take part of, something that's familiar, you know, music and singing, but it's also something that can help them connect to these different struggles in the Philippines that may seem very distant sometimes, especially for those of our youth that have not been able to go back to the or ever gone to the Philippines. Um, and so, yeah, I also during this event I also did a set, and you know, I shared like most of the songs I actually shared with y'all today. And I also shared the film that I did poetry on called Hinga, which was dedicated to my childhood friend, Amado Kaya Canham Rodriguez, that passed away in 2020, August 2020, in the Philippines. He was living there for 2 years, serving indigenous Mangyan communities. And when he was here, he organized with Anak Bayan East Bay, and he was a filmmaker and an artist, and so he always emphasized the importance of cultural work. um, so, you know, as Filipinos, um, and just people here in the US, it really is important for us to uplift the cause of our people back in the Philippines, because back in the Philippines, back home, organizers, teachers, and even everyday youth just like us are targeted just for serving their communities. And even now, it's very crucial, very important, as the children of dictators, Bongbong Marcos and Sara Duterte, just got elected into office. Um, and as these human rights violations are gonna continue to increase and intensify. But we can use cultural work to tell the true history of the Philippines as they try to cover up the brutality of martial law, and as they continue to try to shift the narrative to paint activists as terrorists. And you know, cultural work is a very, very important tool to politicize people, to even just hype up actions, mobilizations, to bring that energy, to tell our own revolutionary histories through our lyrics. Through it's another form of storytelling, and to really bring folks into the music, into the movement, in whatever capacity they have. And yeah, so this is why I really want to contribute to the movement in the Philippines in this way. Um, on a larger scale, like cultural work really like shifts this capitalist culture that we're so used to, that only values art when it can be used as a commodity, when we can profit off of it. And yeah, so like through, even if it has to be one song, a poem, or like one show at a time, like really our art and our cultural work is contributing to shifting this culture and to creating a new one. And compared to like other folks doing music just for music's sake, to get into the industry, that's not like it's not my goal at all with my music. And I think it's also very valid that artists strive for that, because under capitalism, where we have to make money to survive, of course that's the dream, to be able to sustain yourself off of your art. And so um but for me, I really do want my music to serve the movement. I want my music to inspire other folks to get involved in their own local organizations or local struggles. So yes, again, join AB Santa Cruz, join Gab Santa Cruz, um, or even just check them out. Um, and what is yes, I really do want to inspire folks to get involved in their local organizations, and through those organizations to be able to contribute to these struggles overseas. I want folks to hear their own family stories and experiences in the lyrics. I want people to understand our own interconnectedness, and I don't think it's just like a me thing. I think it's something that we're all capable of through our own cultural work, whatever that may be. And I um, really also want to emphasize, like, I want to inspire folks to be able to make that time to create their own art, even when it seems like work, schoolwork, our work for wages and other obligations don't leave enough time for us to really express ourselves. But creating is healing, and it's not only like individually, but it's collectively. And so um cultural work isn't just music, film, dance, or like different visual art, but it's also education is such a big part of cultural work. And so even this like class in itself is contributing to that cultural work. It's shifting the culture of our universities, of our schools, and of what we value as knowledge. um because when I was in Davis, I initially went in as Asian American studies major, but I like quickly changed because we only had one Filipinx studies class at the time. And so again, like, just wanted to prop those who've really been like holding down this class throughout the years and throughout even just this quarter, because it really is important that we carve spaces for ourselves to be able to get this political education. And so again, I really am honored to be here with y'all in this space today. And I hope that this even just helps y'all see that, you know, everyone can be creative in the ways that we understand and contribute both to cultural work and organizing work in both local and global movements. Um, so can you go to the next slide, please? Yes, so before we do a little Q&A, I'm gonna do one last song for y'all. So this song is actually like the last song of my project. Is the title track, and so if you've like seen me perform before, maybe you've heard this, but it's dedicated to all of the cultural workers and all the organizers in the movement, currently doing the movement both here in the US and in the Philippines, but also those who have passed away, dedicating their lives to these struggles. So specifically the homie Amato, you can see some pictures of him on the bottom left and the top right. On the top left and the bottom right is pictures of BJ Alisago, my uncle BJ. He was my dad's best friend, and he was one of the vocalists, the singers of Discarte Namin. So he was one of the ones who wrote the River song. And so, you know, I really want to acknowledge that even though they have passed, their contributions and their art and their work only continue to enliven the movement. So yeah, it's gonna be the last song. I know I keep saying this. I know it's early, but please, y'all, feel free to get hype with me. Hey, cool. Seems like some folks know this track. Maybe even if someone y'all want to turn on your cameras for this last track, for the Q&A portion. Like, I do this for my ancestors, for the mothers and the brothers and my brown sisters, for the lolas that grow us and taught their own history. For those that came before me, I do this for my ancestors. I do this for my ancestors. I do this for my ancestors. Said I do this for my ancestors. Look, I do this for the ones that hold me down. See, my music is rooted in the pre-colonial sound, because through it I'm infusing the culture from then and now. Institutions keep confusing this knowledge coming to my mouth. Wait, generations before ports, immigration, U.S. imperialism, Spanish colonization. The Philippines was many islands, now a nation. Till the Europeans tried to take it, they tried to erase us, take our homes, displace us, kill off our indigenous peoples and traditions. But we are resilient, yeah, we are resistant. Fight to flip the prism, because fuck your systems. I do this for my ancestors, for the mothers and the brothers and my brown sisters, for the lolas that grow us and taught their own history. For those that came before me, I do this for my ancestors. I do this for my ancestors. I do this for my ancestors. Said I do this for my ancestors. Yeah. All right, I still got another verse for y'all. Yeah, look, there's a war in the Philippines due to the regime fueled by gore. They're killing sprees, foreign entities exert they lethal schemes overseas, and so we serve the people striving for peace. I said long live the revolution in the Philippines, so we with the three basic problems of our society. And I grind, continuing on the legacy of the Katipunan, so we fight to be free, screaming ang tao, ang bayan. Ngayon ay lumalaban, mga magbubukid at mga manggagawa, the masses in action, taking their own stand, take up arms, make a plan to defend our homeland. To defend our homeland. My sister just walked in, she's vibing with me. Yeah, said to defend our homeland. Said to defend our homeland. We do this for the movement, we do this for the fucking revolution, for the spirits calling to us through guidance, we're living to blooming, yeah, through the land in which we're rooted, cause people power stronger than their own that they're abusing. Raise your left fist, rise up and resist. Raise your left fist, rise up and resist. Raise your left fist, rise up and resist. Raise your left fist. I do this for my ancestors, for the mothers and the brothers and my brown sisters, for the rulers that grow us and taught their own history. For those that came before me, I do this for my ancestors. 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 Said we do this for my ancestors. Said we do this for my ancestors. Yeah, we do this for my, yeah. Said we do this for my ancestors. I'm gonna fade it out. Yeah, so that was, you know, I was able to share a lot of the music I've been working on for the past like couple of years with y'all and my own journey and story doing this music, doing this cultural work. And I really do appreciate y'all. I've actually never shared like all of this with like anyone before. So yeah, we can open it up now for some Q&A. Again, like y'all can ask me about the organizing work, but also if y'all want to ask me about the music. Again, I like produced and like wrote everything. So if like y'all are even just curious about the process, which I think is also a really big part of the cultural work, feel free to ask that. Yeah, I don't know how to, yes. Yes. Yeah, maybe if y'all actually want to ask a question and hop on the mic and ask me, that'd be cool.
I have a question. Could I?
Yes.
Music and being part of like movement and all that. And I'm just wondering, like, can you link in all your like stuff so we could like listen and find the band that your parents was in or are in still? And will you just like put the information how we can like listen to all that music and stuff? Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Maybe right now I can I'll link Descartes. Let me find it right now. Yeah, Descartes Namen, and I'll link, maybe if it's not right now, I'll link some of the other culture workers that I mentioned too. And also, like I said, all the different organizations that I mentioned. So League of Filipino Students, there's now chapters at San Francisco State, and then now one at UC Berkeley. And then again, Anagbayan chapters all over the US, Gabriela chapters all over the US. And definitely the Gab and Santa Cruz chapters, to Gab and AB chapters in Santa Cruz. Yes, maybe while others are thinking of some questions, I'll find the links right now. Thank you. Thank you for that question.
Amihan, could I ask you about your own political education process? So you spoke about it, and it seems like it was, at home. It was, in the kind of community work that you have been doing for such a long time, but it's also in the exposure trip that you took in 2019. And, you were saying, and I was so curious about this, you said that instead of, having this sense of, okay, there's like the movement work in the Philippines, and then there are, diasporic Filipinos who, are standing in solidarity, that it's all part of the same movement. But you alluded to this too, like here in the United States, we're in the belly of the beast. And so few people have any understanding the consequences of US imperial foreign policy, within sites like the Philippines and elsewhere. And they certainly don't understand much about US militarism. I mean, this is in the United States, it's like 1% of the population serves in the US military, and there's no sense that militarism is the condition of the United States, you know, even though it's the grim reality for people around the world. And so, you know, I too have been on education exposure trips to places like North Korea, you know, which people don't understand at all, in no small part because of the way that it's presented in the media, right? But I was wondering if you could speak about if there is uh, if there is a certain kind of task at hand for Filipinos who are in the United States in terms of US foreign policy, like are there, how's organizing different, you know? So that is one question that I pose. And the other question has to do with culture work. And I love that you're using that term culture work, which, you know, like there's also people who've talked about culture being a front of the revolutionary struggle, you know, and but you were saying that within capitalist society and capitalist culture, culture gets commodified. And so how, you know, like how do you convey the liberatory dimensions of your work? Like, how do you keep it liberatory when so much of how it's received will commodify? Do you know what I mean? Like, in other words, like, you know, the intention is liberation and the message is liberation, but the culture commodifies. Like, we are saturated by capitalist culture, you know, so, you know, just like how do you keep it liberatory? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, sorry. My brain's like, okay. Yo, I have not been in college for like 2 years. So like my brain's like, okay. So to answer your second question, I think for me, I mean, just what comes to mind after you posing that question is um the way that we utilize our music. Of course, it's going to be capitalized off of. Of course, it's going to be turned into something you can profit off of. And again, like I was saying, like, of course, as artists, like, who need to be able to sustain ourselves, like, it's at times where we have to. I'm gonna be real. Sometimes I'll take a show because I'm like, I'm broke. I need that money, right? And so I think for me, I always try to um, get in that mindset of um, okay, but how do I use the music right now to contribute to the movement, to prop the work, even if it's at some random show. Like, for example, even if it's at, like, you know, I'll play a lot of shows that are like for the Filipino community, and it makes sense that I'm able to prop these things. But even if it's at random shows, I think for me, it is, again, like making those connections in propping how no matter what, no matter your background, no matter if you're Filipino, no matter if your family's migrated from some other countries, no matter if you're born here, like you said, like U.S. imperialism, it affects everything on a global scale. And so we can make those connections in terms of, like, even if I'm talking about um, the ways that our tax dollars here in the US are going to attacks and killings of indigenous peoples in the Philippines. That's the same case for a lot of different countries. And I will be honest too, it's so complex that I couldn't even like explain and like break down how all of that is in the works right now. But like I said, it's like, for me, it's a continuous process, kind of like, to answer your first question, if I can remember. Yeah, to answer your first question, like, for example, like, even just like, you know, it's sometimes it's not enough. It's very important to get political education, but like I want to emphasize, it's very important to integrate with these communities. Integrating doesn't have to be going to the Philippines on an exposure trip. Integrating can be integrating with workers, integrating with, like I said, like the work that I do right now with the youth, and being able to connect their struggles with these different larger movements um, that have been going on for years. Because, like I said, everything is very interconnected on a global scale, on a local scale. And so I think for me, in terms of the cultural work, this is what I always say to folks. You need to be doing, if you're going to be doing cultural work about, revolution and liberation movement, like you have to be very mindful of when you're even like using those words to make sure that you're actually contributing to these type of struggles and this type of work, because that's where it gets dangerous, where if you're using these buzzwords of revolution and blah 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 blah, but you're only using it to profit for yourself, you're only using those words as a commodity, then that's where it gets dangerous, because that's how capitalism is able to profit off of these movements. When folks are I wouldn't call it cultural work, when folks are doing this music talking about organizing, but they don't do the organizing work. And organizing work doesn't have to even necessarily be in an organization, but like I said, it can be using your music to even just organize different events, to fundraise, to prop different struggles. And so I think that's where the line is for me, of like music and cultural work, and really appropriating actually cultural work, um, um, to just capitalize off of it. Thank you for that question. Any others?
Yeah, Azo, go ahead. Mhm.
Yeah, hello, I'm Azo. I use he, they pronouns. I'm one of the co-coordinators for PhD, and I'm also a part of Unlock in Santa Cruz. One of the students asked through our Canvas, what does your writing process look like? Do you have anything you always have to do while writing?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that question. My writing process. So basically, like in terms of the process, like right now, for example, I'd say like a lot of this, or the songs that I've showed y'all, that I performed for y'all today, is actually more of my older music that, like I was saying, I wrote a lot of them back in college just a couple years ago. And so back then the process was just reflecting on these different experiences, and of course I would always have a theme. Of course, like, it's about my exposure trip. This theme of like Dear Kasama is about the struggles of youth and students. And so what my process looks like now, actually, maybe if y'all pull up to some of my upcoming shows where I'm gonna do some of my newer music, the process looks like now is how do I say this? Like filling in the gaps of my own story, because for me, like, I want my project's like my dalam buhay, my like life story, right? And so up until this point, and so at this point, my writing process looks like filling in those gaps. For example, I was debating on playing it for y'all today. I didn't do it, but I am writing a song about my parents' work that they've been doing. So the first verse of that song is about my mom's, basically what I told y'all, like about my mom's organizing work with LFS, and the second verse is about my dad's cultural work. And yeah, so first, that's what it looks like right now. And if you want to know about like the nitty gritty of the writing process, like it's literally like me um with like the basic structure of the beat I just made, and I'll just kind of have an idea of, I think for me, how I approach writing, it's poetry, right? It's poetry on top of a beat in the form of song. And so a lot of it is like even just thinking of different syllables, different rhymes, writing it all down, like looking at it and seeing how I can connect it and create it into a story, and tell my story through connecting um, those words, if that makes sense. And I will say too, like, sometimes the writing process is like, oh my God, it just like flows and I'm just like writing. And then sometimes the writing process is like, that shit's like taking like months to finish like a 3-minute song. And so I will say it varies too. I hope that answered their question, and thank you for that question.
Yeah, so if anyone else has other questions, feel free to unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat. Otherwise, we do have other questions that students have created throughout the week that we'll be reading. But yeah, if you have any on the spot questions, just feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
I have a question, not from a student, it's from me. Are there any artists that you would want to collaborate with, whether like Philam artists or just like artists in general?
I think, I mean, I think for me, I don't know if y'all listen to Power Struggle actually. It's my first collaboration that I've done actually, like on like a release song. He just put out his project on May Day actually. So I have a song with him and another sick ass organizer, cultural worker, Pat. He goes by Rosella. So I think for me, I bring that up because I don't think I necessarily have like artists that are hella in the game that I want to collaborate with, but I think for me it's like um I want to continue to build with other cultural workers and other folks who even want to become more educated, politicized, organized, and only maybe even have the capacity to contribute through their music. Um, but I think for me, some um, very talented cultural workers I want to mention is like all the homies that were on that contributed to my album preview show back in June. So Katrina Liwanag, she is also my she's also the coordinator for Kabataan with me. So we work very closely together, but she is such a talented R&B singer, rapper, fucking dancer, musician. She plays guitar. So y'all should, I keep telling her like, you need to put out music. So, and she's really been supporting me throughout the process. Like every time I tell her you need to put out music, she's like, well, you're about to put out an album. And I'm like, we can work at the same time and we can both help each other out in putting out this culture work because I think it's so needed. And then another homie, they go by Nickel or Nickel Rivera. They're a member of LFS, SF State. They were the past chairperson like last year. And they I've known them since high school and we were in like slam poetry club together and they do really great spoken word pieces. So yeah, those are definitely some two culture workers that y'all should check out. Thanks also for that question and thank you for vibing along with me the entire event.
We have another question from one of the students earlier in the week. It's kind of long, so I'll put it in the chat too. What are the messages most important to you that are conveyed through your music? What is the state of mind you are in for some of your songs, and do these emotions feel addressed once it's recorded?
I think for me, like I told y'all, I am a very anxious person. And so when I write this music and when I perform for folks, I feel like I really do channel that like agitation and just that like determination of other folks who continue to do this organizing work because sometimes I'm like, sometimes I'm just like, I love like how we were talking about like the commodification of like cultural work. I love creating music and I love writing, but sometimes I don't like the fact that I have to even like release songs or like sell my music and stuff like that. You know, I wish I that's why I don't even have music out. I love just like sharing music like in like spaces like this or even just live shows, because I think that is actually how music should be shared, because you can really feel the energy in that moment and you're really like all there together. And so I think for me, what pushes me to continue to share my music is that, you know, the messages that I am sharing is not only my stories, but the stories of, it's like what I said, it is our revolutionary history in the Philippines and here um, in the US in the Bay. And I think for me, um, being very privileged, but also humbled to have grown up in this movement, I think it's very important for me to share what that's um like I said, like just having like parents that are organizers that I grew up going to these actions and rallies. I think I take for granted like how much folks don't get to experience that, and how even like it's even just until college that folks have to like be educated and politicized. um and so I think for me, um the state of mind that I'm in when I'm writing or even just performing, it really is like, this is not for me. This music is not for me. I am telling my story, but it's in connection with the movement, in connection with all of our stories. And that is really what keeps me wanting to do this, because my anxiety gets the best of me. And so if it was up to me, I'm like, I would just continue to just like write songs for myself in my little studio here. But I really what keeps me going really is like when folks come up to me and are like, wow, like I really resonated with that, or like, wow, that really moved me, I really want to get organized, I really want to get involved because of that. And I think that's why cultural work's so important, because it has the power to do that for folks, because sometimes it's hard to connect, it's hard to move folks if you're sitting through a workshop or sitting through, you know, speeches even. It really is the cultural work that is able to like resonate with folks on a larger level.
Cool. We actually have another student question. So are there stories that you hear about the Philippines that make you feel hope for the future? Are there any stories that make you lose morale?
Mm.
But,
I think for me, um, of course, with the election, with the recent elections, it's been a bit rough, but also very agitating. You know, it's very telling that um, these families like Duterte and Marcos, um, the fact that they're able to still grab power, it's very telling of the state of the Philippines and their tactics, the government's tactics. And so, but I think for me is like I keep mentioning our revolutionary history. It's thinking back to times during martial law, when, you know, the whatever Marcos Senior, whatever, yeah, the first during the dictatorship of Marcos during martial law, it really was the youth that came out, thousands and thousands of youth that came out and were the ones, you know, they say like it's the masses, it's the youth that are the makers of history, and we can see that. And I think for me, connecting that to the, even though it's different, even though it's through a program, through a high school program, working with youth now, they really give me that, they are what give me hope, they are what keep me doing this work. Because like I said, how it's very important to integrate with the folks that are on the ground doing this work. Like for me, like I can easily just be writing this music stuck in this little studio by myself, but it's so important for me to integrate with the youth, um, that are really the ones taking action, agitated. Like we had a action at the Philippine consulate couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago or something, again for the new Bataan 5. And um, Kabataan SF, the youth, they made a statement. I've never seen a high school club make a statement at an action in the Philippine consulate. I think it probably was the first time. And then a couple weeks later, or yeah, when we had a bunch of actions leading up to the election, they mobilized a bunch of high school youth from Daly City, Westmore Youth, and they made statements as individuals. And so it's like just seeing that quick development in the work and seeing that high schoolers need also a way beyond these different programs that are like very limited within the institution, within the school, to be able to really make change and like really understand their role in history in this moment in time.
So, Amihan, thank you so much for coming out. I think that I am speaking for everyone. I was looking at the comments in the chat. I hope that you had a chance to look through those as well.
I'm trying to like sift through them right
now. Oh
now.
yeah, I'm speaking for everyone in saying that it has been so moving to have you here. You know what? I will send you the chat. You know, so
okay, yeah, because I was looking to take pictures of it. Okay, yeah, please.
I'm gonna share it with you.
Okay, thank you.
But I wanted to say that, you know, just even encountering the kind of work that you're doing, the thinking that you're doing, and the sort of seamlessness of your art and your political practice. I mean, it just reminds us that political education is not about learning in some rote way to reproduce the status quo. It is actually to transform, you know, and thank you for transforming us with your work. And I hope that this is going to be a continued relationship, and we at the CRJ welcome you back. And I know that PhD in the future welcome you back. And maybe once your album is out, you know, we can talk again, and it'd be wonderful to have you actually in person at Santa Cruz. So maybe we can plan for that. But I also wanted to say that even if you didn't see it in the chat, there are people who were heeding your call that they should join Anakbayan or, you know, Gab, and or take part in the exposure trips. So your work has had an immediate impact too in that way. Yeah, so I don't know if the co-coordinators would like to say anything, but just thank you. Thank you so much. Azo, Matt. And I want to say,
I just want to say thank you for coming here. It's the first time we had like a Filipino artist in about like 2-3 years, I think. Yeah, it's really special today, and I'm really glad we could offer this in this space. Yeah, thank you again for answering our call and working with us to hold this event.
Azo, do you want to say anything? No, I just want to say that Eno was wanted to be here so badly, and Eno is here in ferocity, solidarity, and spirit in all ways.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes. Thank y'all so much for having me in the space, for listening. I really do appreciate it. Y'all humble me. I really do appreciate it. And I look forward to building with all of y'all here in any capacity, in any way in the future. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Y'all.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.